The galaxy still can't explain how an alien weapon turned into the one thing that healed entire worlds. And the strangest part? The impossible shift began when a single human whispered 4 quiet words. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to join us, and stay close. Because the story starts now. Aurora docks sprawled across the plateau like a promise half kept. The bioluminescent oceans below pulsed with blues and greens that nobody in the immigration sector ever had time to appreciate. The year was 2239, and Lumen 4 had become what every neutral colony eventually became, a waiting room for people with nowhere else to go. Lucas Brandt had been working as a civil facilitator for 3 years now. The job was simple: help confused immigrants fill out forms, translate bureaucratic nonsense into plain language, fetch coffee, explain signs. It kept him busy enough that he didn't have to think. He was broad-shouldered, with a beard that suggested he'd forgotten to care rather than chosen a style. A faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his days as a colonial police officer. He didn't talk about those days. Not anymore. The immigration waiting hall was the same every day, packed with tired beings from a dozen species, all clutching documents, all wearing the same expression of exhausted hope. Merchants, refugees, workers, the desperate and the pragmatic, crammed together under fluorescent lights that hummed just loud enough to be annoying. And then there was the corner. Row G, seats 12 through 18, always empty. That's where she sat. Nyari, the woman everyone avoided without quite knowing why. She was very, and objectively, she was striking. Pale skin with gray-blue undertones that caught the light. Dark hair pulled into a single long braid. Delicate features that would have been called aristocratic on any world. But it was her eyes that people noticed first and then tried very hard not to notice again. Dual irises, an outer ring of blue, an inner ring of gold, both moving independently as she tracked movement across the room. Lucas had watched the pattern develop over weeks. Someone would enter the hall, scan for seats, spot an empty row, start walking toward it. Then they'd get within about 3 meters of her and something would change. They'd suddenly remember an appointment, or feel an urgent need to stand instead, or decide that the crowded section was actually preferable. She never moved, never spoke, just sat there with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, watching it happen again and again. He'd asked around, casually. Nobody could explain it. They just knew that sitting near her felt wrong. Like something was pressing on the back of their skull. Like forgotten regrets were surfacing without permission. From his station near the translation kiosks, Lucas noticed other details. The way station security gave her extra space during their rounds. How even the cleaning drones seemed to path around her section. The maintenance kid, Timo, spent a lot of time in the ceiling ducts above that area, watching her through the grating with an expression that Lucas recognized. Fascination mixed with caution, the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Today the pattern broke. A Keltheran mother entered with her child, a small thing with 4 arms and curious eyes. The kid spotted the empty row and made a beeline for it, probably just excited to have space to fidget. The mother's face went pale. She grabbed 2 of her child's arms and yanked hard, pulling the kid away. "Not there!" she hissed, loud enough that Lucas heard it from across the hall. "Stay away from the strange woman!" The child whined in confusion, but the mother dragged them toward the standing room section instead. Nyari's expression didn't change. But something in the absolute stillness of her posture told Lucas that she'd heard it too. Probably heard it 100 times. He set down the coffee he'd been delivering and made a decision. Enough was enough. He walked across the hall, past the nervous clusters of people, past the security checkpoint, straight toward row G. He could feel it as he got closer. A subtle pressure, like walking into a room where an argument had just ended. His hands felt cold. Old memories flickered at the edges of his thoughts, the weight of his police badge, the sound of sirens, the smell of blood and burned metal. He ignored it and sat down in seat 13. right next to her. She turned those dual-colored eyes on him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The sensation intensified the moment he settled into the seat. Not pain exactly, more like the feeling of standing too close to a cliff edge or opening a door to find someone you'd been avoiding for years. His pulse quickened. Images surfaced. His partner, Jensen, bleeding out on cracked pavement. The call he'd made too late. The investigation that cleared him but changed nothing. Lucas took a slow breath and let the memories come. They were always there anyway. Might as well acknowledge them. He leaned slightly toward her and spoke quietly, so only she would hear. "It's okay. I'm not afraid." Nyari's dual-ringed eyes widened. Both irises dilated at once, the gold and blue rings expanding in perfect synchronization. For someone who'd spent weeks maintaining perfect composure, the crack in her mask was startling. Because what she'd just felt from him wasn't fear. The veiled gift, the thing her people had named with bureaucratic precision to hide what it actually did, worked by pulling hidden truths to the surface. Lies people told themselves, guilt they'd buried, shame they'd wrapped in excuses. It grabbed those things and yanked them into the light, and most beings couldn't handle the sudden exposure. But when it touched Lucas, it found something unexpected. He knew. He already knew about the guilt, the failure, the weight he carried. He'd looked at it so many times that it had lost its power to destroy him. The gift could expose it, sure, but he'd already done that work himself. What surprised her more was the why, the reason he'd sat down, the decision, made consciously, to approach what everyone else fled from, because he'd seen a mother pull her child away and call her strange, and he'd recognized that particular kind of loneliness. She saw it in a flash, the way he'd carried his own isolation, the years of working this job as penance, the belief that he didn't deserve connection anymore, so he dedicated himself to helping others connect instead. She saw a man who'd already looked at his worst parts and decided to keep going anyway. "Why didn't you run?" The words came out hoarse, like she'd forgotten how to use her voice. "Already ran enough in my life." He settled back in the chair, casual, as if sitting in a psychological pressure cooker was just another Tuesday. "Didn't get me anywhere useful." Around them, the waiting hall had gone quiet in that specific way that meant people were pretending not to watch. A Davroxy clerk had paused mid-stamp. A security officer had her hand near her comm. Even Timo, up in his duct, had pressed his face closer to the grating. "You feel it, though?" It wasn't a question. Nyari's hands were trembling slightly in her lap. "Everyone does." "Yeah, old memories mostly, nothing I haven't dealt with before." He glanced at her, and his expression softened. "Must be exhausting, watching everyone scatter?" She didn't answer. Couldn't, really, because nobody had ever acknowledged that before. They just left, uncomfortable, and she was expected to pretend it was normal. "I'm Lucas, facilitator, Sector 7. He didn't offer a handshake. Somehow he'd intuited that touch might be too much. "Been watching you sit here for 3 months. Figured it was time someone actually said hello." "Nyari," her voice was steadier now. "Very, cultural researcher. That's the official story?" A ghost of a smile, the polite one. They sat in silence for a moment, not the crushing, isolated silence she was used to. Something different. Shared, almost. "I should tell you," she said carefully, "that being near me for extended periods can have effects. The gift doesn't stop." The gift. Lucas nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. "That what your people call it?" "The veiled gift, the ability to see what others hide from themselves." She paused. "It's considered dangerous. Most useful things are." He stood but didn't move away. "I've got to finish my shift, but if you're here tomorrow, I'll probably sit here again. Fair warning." He walked back toward his station, leaving her sitting in the row that was no longer quite so empty. Across the hall, Director Havel pulled up the security feed from that section and frowned at his console. Then he opened a file marked Very Subject, Evaluation Status, and began typing an update. In the ducts above, Timo watched the strange woman touch her face like she was checking if it was real, and for the first time in months, she wasn't sitting perfectly still. Her shoulders had dropped slightly. Her hands had unclenched. She looked, he thought, like someone who'd just remembered what it felt like to be seen. Lucas kept his word. The next day, he sat in the same spot. And the day after that. And the day after that. At first, they didn't talk much. Just the occasional comment. Nyari would point out when someone was filling a form incorrectly. Lucas would bring her water without asking. Small gestures that felt enormous given the 3-meter exclusion zone everyone else maintained. On the 4th day, she told him about the veiled gift properly. "It doesn't read minds," she explained, voice low. "It pulls forward what you're already hiding from yourself. The lie you told that you've convinced yourself is true. The guilt you've rationalized away, the fear you've buried under anger." "Sounds like therapy with less warning," Lucas said. Despite herself, she almost laughed. "An aggressive form, yes. Among my people, it was considered sacred once, a way to achieve clarity. Spiritual leaders would use it to help others find truth." "What changed?" Her expression darkened. "Wars. Someone realized it could be weaponized. Use it in interrogations. Break alliances by exposing hidden agendas. Turn diplomatic meetings into psychological battlegrounds." She looked at her hands. "The Veyri Council tried to control it. Then they decided the only safe option was isolation. Anyone with the gift gets classified as a potential threat. So they sent you here." "Cultural researcher," she repeated with bitter precision. "Studying human integration patterns from a safe distance. That's what my papers say." "And what do the files nobody's supposed to see say?" She met his eyes. "That if the veiled gift affects humans the way it affects other species, I'm to be transferred to an isolated facility for permanent observation." Lucas absorbed that. Basically prison. Basically. They sat with that for a while. Around them, the normal chaos of the immigration hall continued. A Torgathi couple arguing about paperwork, a tired clerk calling numbers, the ever-present hum of the ventilation system. "You said it pulls forward what people hide from themselves," Lucas said eventually. "What did you see when I sat down?" Nyari hesitated. "You want to know?" "I asked, didn't I? I saw you holding someone while they died. A partner. Jensen." She watched his face carefully. "I saw you make a call for backup that came too late. I saw investigators clear you of wrongdoing. And I saw you choose to punish yourself anyway." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Yeah, that's about right. But I also saw why you approached me." Her voice softened. "You recognized the isolation. You'd been carrying your own for so long that you knew exactly what it looked like. Guess we're both in waiting rooms then, just different kinds." Before she could respond, something moved in the ceiling. They both looked up to find Timo's face pressed against the duct grating, eyes wide. The kid realized he'd been spotted and started to scramble away, but Lucas raised a hand. "You can come down. I've seen you up there for weeks." Slowly, reluctantly, a panel opened, and Timo lowered himself down on a maintenance ladder. He was 16, gangly, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he spent most of his time avoiding people. He approached cautiously, stopping about 2 meters from Nyari's seat, close enough to talk, far enough to run. "I wanted to ask something," he said, addressing Nyari directly. "Your eyes, they have 2 colors. Is it because you see 2 truths at the same time?" Nyari blinked. Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "I never thought of it that way," she said carefully. "But perhaps the truth people show and the truth they hide." Timo nodded. Like this confirmed something important. Then with the fearlessness of youth, he took another step closer. "Does it hurt, seeing all that?" "Yes," she admitted. "Sometimes it does, but you do it anyway." "I don't have a choice. The gift doesn't stop." "That's not what I meant," Timo shifted his weight. I meant you could have stayed locked away somewhere, but you're here, where people are, even though it hurts. For the second time in a week, Nayari found herself without words. Lucas caught the kid's eye and gave him an approving nod. Timo flushed, then scrambled back up his ladder before the moment could get too heavy. That evening, Lucas was called to Director Havel's office. Havel was the kind of administrator who'd learned to survive by being cautiously paranoid. He kept his desk organized to the point of sterility and his expressions carefully neutral. "You've been spending time with the very subject," Havel said, not a question. "Nayari, her name's Nayari. You know what she is, what she can do." "Yeah, I know." Lucas crossed his arms. "You asking me to stop? I'm asking if you know what you're getting into. Psychic abilities are regulated for a reason. One incident, one diplomatic complaint, and this station's neutrality is compromised. She's not a weapon. She's a person sitting alone in a waiting room." Havel's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on his stylus. "There's an auditor coming, Sarah Velen, High Caste Veri. She'll be here in 72 hours to evaluate the situation." Lucas felt something cold settle in his stomach. And I suggest you decide how invested you want to be before she arrives. Because if there's any evidence that the gift is affecting station personnel, Nayari won't be in that waiting room anymore. She'll be in containment. Lucas left the office and went straight back to the hall. Nayari was still there, though the crowds had thinned for the evening shift. He sat down and told her what Havel had said. She closed her eyes. "Sarah Velen, of course it would be her. You know her? She's the one who advocated for isolation protocols in the first place. If she's coming, it means the Council wants proof that I'm too dangerous to be around other species." Nayari's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her. They were gripping the armrests hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. 3 days. I have 3 days before everything ends." Lucas reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and placed his hand near hers on the armrest. Not touching, just close. "Hey, we'll figure something out." She looked at him with those dual-colored eyes, and for a moment he saw past the careful composure to the raw fear underneath. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "Because I spent 3 years running from guilt, and it didn't fix anything. Maybe it's time to try standing still instead." Above them, in the ducts, Timo listened and made a decision of his own. The countdown began immediately. 72 hours before Sarah Velen's arrival. 72 hours to prove that Nayari wasn't a threat, or, failing that, to prepare for the worst. Nayari told Lucas everything the next morning. Not in the waiting hall, but in a quiet corridor near the observation deck, where the bioluminescent ocean was visible through reinforced glass. "The veiled gift was sacred once," she said, watching light pulse through the water below. "Centuries ago, Veri, who had it, were revered. They helped resolve disputes, guided people through grief. It was considered a blessing." What happened? The reunification wars, multiple Veri factions fighting for control of our home systems. Someone realized that if you put a gifted individual in a room with enemy diplomats, you could tear apart their negotiating position in minutes. Expose every hidden agenda, every secret doubt, every lie they'd told their own people. She turned from the window and her expression was haunted. They used children, took kids who showed the gift and trained them as psychological weapons, put them in interrogation rooms with prisoners. Some people broke immediately. Others took longer, but everyone broke eventually. You can't withstand having every buried shame dragged into the light all at once. Lucas felt sick. "How old were you when they tried to recruit you?" 8. But my family refused. We went into hiding instead, moved between colonies. By the time the Council banned weaponized use of the gift, I was 15. She looked at her hands. "The ban didn't make us welcome, though. It just made us controlled, monitored, isolated. Because nobody trusts something they once used as a weapon." Sarah Velen was part of that program, wasn't she? Nayari nodded. She was a handler, never gifted herself, but she ran the operations, decided which prisoners were worth breaking, which alliances to sabotage. She spent the last 20 years advocating for complete isolation of anyone with the gift. Atonement, maybe, or just fear. Then we show her it doesn't have to be a weapon. How? By letting her see it in action? Nyari shook her head. That's exactly what she wants, proof that I'm affecting people. What if the proof shows something different, that humans react to it differently, that it doesn't have to destroy people? Lucas, you don't understand. If she puts me in a formal evaluation session, I won't be able to control it. The gift responds to emotional intensity, to lies and pressure. If she starts pushing, starts trying to provoke reactions, it'll lash out at everyone in the room, including her, especially her. They stood in silence, watching the ocean lights. A school of something bioluminescent swam past the plateau's edge, leaving trails of blue-green glow. Come on, Lucas said suddenly. Shift ends in an hour. I want to show you something. That evening, he took her to the external docking platforms, the ones that jutted out over the ocean, used for maintenance and supply transfers. During off hours, they were usually empty. The view was spectacular. The bioluminescent ocean stretched to the horizon, every wave carrying its own light. The plateau's edges glowed where water met rock. Above, 3 of Lumen 4's moons painted the sky in shades of silver and pale gold. I come here when the station gets too loud, Lucas said, when the waiting hall feels like it's crushing me. Nyari stepped to the railing carefully, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. It's beautiful. Yeah. He leaned against the rail beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Figured you could use a reminder that there's more than immigration offices and security protocols. Shock, she breathed in the salt-tinged air. For the first time in months, the tightness in her chest eased slightly. Out here, with just the ocean and the sky and the sound of waves against stone, she didn't feel dangerous. She just felt present. Tell me about Jensen, she said quietly. Your partner. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. He was better at the job than me. Calmer. Better instincts. We'd been working together for 2 years when we got a call about a smuggling ring, weapons coming through a supposedly clean cargo shipment. What went wrong? I went in too fast. Didn't wait for backup. Thought I could handle it. Thought the intel was solid. It wasn't. His hands gripped the railing. Jensen came in after me. Took a blast that was meant for me. I held him while we waited for medical. 40 minutes. He died holding my hand, apologizing for not being fast enough. That's why you punish yourself. That's why I try to do better. He glanced at her. You see people's hidden truths. I'm trying to make sure mine isn't that I'm still the idiot who got his partner killed. Is it working? Ask me after this is over. Ida. They stood together as the light shifted on the water. At one point, their hands brushed against each other on the railing. Both pulled back, but slowly, reluctantly. You see me completely, Nyari said, so quietly he almost missed it. And you still choose to stay. That's not normal. Nothing about me has been normal for a long time. She turned to face him, and the ocean lights reflected in her dual-ringed eyes. If Sarah succeeds, if they take me away, I want you to know that these last few days, sitting in that hall with you, have been the most human I've felt in years. Human? Connected. Real. Not a weapon or a threat or a problem to be managed. Just a person talking to another person. Lucas wanted to say something reassuring. That they'd find a way. That it would work out. But he'd stopped making promises he couldn't keep years ago. Instead, he said, "Then let's make sure she sees that too." When they returned to the station, there was a message waiting. Official. Terse. Evaluation session scheduled. Tomorrow, 14:00 hours. Subject Nyari of Veri. Observer Lucas Brandt. Attendance mandatory. They'd run out of time. Sarah Velen arrived like winter given form. She was tall for a Very, with the kind of bearing that came from decades of authority. Her hair was pulled back severely, shot through with silver that looked deliberate rather than aged. She wore formal council robes, deep blue with gold accents that caught the station's harsh lighting. Her eyes were single-ringed, standard Very genetics, but they carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. The preliminary meeting took place in Conference Room 3, a sterile space with a long metal table and chairs that were designed for function rather than comfort. Nyari sat on one side. Lucas stood behind her, technically an observer but positioned like a guard. Havel occupied the head of the table, radiating nervous energy. Sarah took the opposite end, flanked by two assistants who never spoke. "The data is concerning," Sarah began without preamble. She activated a holo display that showed incident reports, neural scan readings, and testimony transcripts. Subject Nyari has been present during 47 documented cases of psychological distress among station personnel and visitors, anxiety attacks, unexplained emotional episodes, 2 cases of temporary dissociative states. "None of which caused lasting harm," Nyari said quietly. "Harm is measured in more than medical outcomes." Sarah's tone was clinical. "Your presence creates instability. People avoid you. Security protocols are disrupted. The very nature of your gift makes you a walking diplomatic incident." "Hey, she's been here for 8 months," Lucas cut in. "If she was really that dangerous, something worse would have happened by now." Sarah turned her gaze on him, and he understood immediately why people found her intimidating. "Facilitator Brandt, your file indicates you've been spending considerable time in proximity to the subject. Tell me, have you experienced any effects?" "Yeah, I remembered things I'd been avoiding, felt uncomfortable, worked through it." "Worked through it," she repeated, like the phrase was foreign. "The veiled gift doesn't simply make people uncomfortable. It exposes psychological architecture that most beings spend their entire lives constructing. The fact that you sat through that and remained functional is either remarkable resilience or evidence that you're not being truthful about the experience. Or evidence that humans process it differently," Lucas shot back. "An untested hypothesis." "Everything's untested until someone tests it." Havel cleared his throat nervously. "The Council's concern is understandable. However, we have no evidence of actual harm. The subject has complied with all observation protocols." "Because she knows she's being watched." Sarah pulled up another file. "According to this classified report, the plan has always been clear. If the veiled gift affects humans the way it affects other species, Subject Nyari is to be transferred to an isolated facility. The only question is whether we have sufficient proof." Nyari's hands were clenched in her lap, but her voice stayed level. "So you came here already knowing what you'd conclude." "I came here to gather evidence. The fact that you have a human defender doesn't change the fundamental reality. Your gift doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about intent or control. It simply is, and that makes you inherently dangerous." "Then why not just take her now?" Lucas demanded. "Why the session? Why the theater?" For the first time, something flickered in Sarah's expression. Not quite emotion, but close. "Because the Council requires documentation, proof that isolation is necessary. Compassion may not be good policy, Facilitator Brandt, but sentimentalism must at least be thoroughly disproven before action is taken." The room fell silent. Outside, through the reinforced window, they could see the waiting hall. Row G, with its perpetual empty seats. Havel spoke carefully. "Then perhaps we should delay the formal evaluation. Gather more observational data. There's no need to rush into a decision that could have significant diplomatic ramifications." Sarah considered this. Her assistants remained statue still, waiting. "Very well," she said finally. "The formal session will take place tomorrow at 1400 hours. That gives Subject Nyari 1 more day to demonstrate control. or one more day to prove the necessity of isolation? Yeah, she looked directly at Nayari. I suggest you use it wisely. She stood, and her assistants moved with her in perfect synchronization. At the door, she paused. One more thing, Facilitator Brandt. Your psychological profile suggests you have a tendency to intervene in situations you perceive as unjust, to play hero, even when it costs you. I find it interesting that a human with a savior complex has attached himself to an alien who can read hidden motivations. I wonder what she sees when she looks at you. Genuine compassion, or simply another form of self-punishment? She didn't wait for an answer. The door sealed behind her with a hiss. Lucas and Nayari sat in the conference room for a long minute after everyone else had left. Tomorrow, Nayari said, she's going to push, hard, and when I lose control, she'll have everything she needs. Then we don't lose control. Lucas, you don't understand. In a formal session, surrounded by hostility and pressure, the gift doesn't just pull hidden things to the surface. It amplifies them, forces them. Everyone in that room will feel their worst moments all at once, including her. Nayari looked at him. That's what I'm afraid of. Not what she'll see in me. What she'll see in herself. Because Sarah Velen spent years using people like me as weapons. And if the gift shows her that truth while she's trying to prove I'm dangerous, it won't matter that she's the one who created the monster she's afraid of. Lucas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the waiting hall, at the empty row that wasn't quite as empty anymore. Then maybe, he said quietly, it's time she faced that. And maybe it's time I faced what I've been running from, too. What do you mean? He turned back to her. Tomorrow, in that session, whatever the gift needs to do, let it. Don't hold back. Don't try to protect anyone. Lucas, no, you don't know what you're asking. Yeah, I do. He met her eyes. For 3 years I've been hiding in this job, pretending I'm helping people when really I'm just making sure I never have to be responsible for anything important again. You said the gift pulls forward what people hide from themselves. Well, I'm done hiding. So if that's what it takes to show Sarah that humans can face this and survive, then that's what we do. And if you break? He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then at least I tried standing still for once. Tomorrow would tell if courage was enough. The evaluation room was smaller than the conference space. Deliberately so, Lucas suspected. Interrogation rooms always were. Close quarters. Nowhere to hide. A metal table bolted to the floor. Chairs that couldn't be moved. Cameras in 3 corners. Neural monitoring equipment lining one wall. Its displays showing baseline readings in cool blue. Nayari sat with her hands folded on the table. Lucas stood against the back wall, where Havel had positioned him with strict instructions not to interfere. Sarah sat across from Nayari, perfectly composed. 2 guards waited outside the sealed door. Let's begin, Sarah said. She activated a recording device. This is formal evaluation session 004, subject Nayari of Veri, regarding classification status under Council Resolution 7-3, regarding psychically active individuals. She pulled up a data pad. Subject: you've been on Lumen 4 for 8 months. During that time, you've maintained minimal contact with station personnel. Why? Because my presence causes discomfort. Elaborate. The veiled gift affects those nearby. They feel exposed, uncomfortable. Most choose to avoid me rather than experience that sensation. Yet Facilitator Brandt has chosen proximity. Sarah glanced at Lucas. Why do you think that is? Nayari hesitated. You'd have to ask him. I'm asking you. What do you see when you look at him? What truths does your gift reveal? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lucas felt the pressure building, that familiar sensation of old memories stirring. I see someone carrying guilt, Nayari said carefully. Someone who believes he failed someone important, someone trying to make amends. Isn't that convenient? Sarah's tone was scalpel sharp. A human with a guilt complex, desperate for redemption, attaches himself to an alien who needs defending. Classic savior behavior. Have you considered that he's using you to feel better about his own failures? That's not fair, Lucas started, but Havel shot him a warning look. Fair, Korum. Sarah turned that analytical gaze on him. You lost your partner to your own poor judgment. You carry that failure like a badge, and now you found someone else who needs saving. How is that not the same pattern? The pressure in the room intensified. The neural monitors flickered, showing increased activity. Nyari's hands clenched on the table. Stop, she whispered. Stop what? Stop telling the truth? Isn't that what your gift does? Syrah leaned forward. Or perhaps the truth is that you're not as noble as you pretend. You sit in that waiting room, alone, playing the martyr. But you could have stayed in isolation, away from people entirely. Instead, you chose to be where others could see you suffer, where someone like Brant might eventually take pity on you. That's not true, Nyari said, but her voice was shaking. Isn't it? The veiled gift pulls hidden truths to the surface. So tell me, what truth are you hiding? That you wanted someone to approach you? That you needed the validation of being seen as more than a weapon? The monitors started beeping. Warning lights flickered yellow. Lucas felt it now. Really felt it. The gift wasn't just pulling at old memories anymore. It was tearing through every rationalization, every excuse, every lie he'd told himself. The voice in his head that said he was doing this to help Nyari. The one that insisted he was different now, better than the cop who'd gotten his partner killed. All of it was being stripped away, and underneath was the raw truth. He hadn't changed. He was still the same man. Still making the same mistakes. Still attaching himself to lost causes because it felt like atonement. Still running from responsibility by pretending to embrace it. Across the table, Nyari was breathing hard. Tears streaked her face. I didn't want this, she gasped. I never wanted any of this, but I didn't have a choice. My gift, my isolation, none of it was my decision. I was 8 years old when they tried to make me a weapon. 8. And when my family refused, we spent years hiding, moving, living in fear. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Not because I wanted pity, because I was tired of running. Sarah's mask cracked, just a fraction. You think I don't know what it's like to use people as weapons? You think I don't carry that? The monitors went from yellow to orange, neural activity spiking. The gift was feeding on the emotional intensity, pulling truths from everyone in the room. Havel, standing by the door, felt his own memories surface. The orders he'd signed that he knew were unjust. The people he'd failed to help because helping them would have jeopardized his position. The comfortable lies of bureaucracy. Syrah saw herself, really saw herself. The handler who'd sent children into interrogation rooms, the woman who'd justified atrocities as military necessity, the decades spent advocating for isolation not because it was right, but because the alternative was admitting she'd been wrong. And the gift showed all of them the cost, not just the actions, but the weight. The years of carrying those choices. The ways they'd twisted themselves into knots to avoid facing simple, terrible truths. The monitors flashed red. One of the guards outside felt it through the door and activated his comm. Medical to evaluation room 3, possible psychic emergency. Havel moved toward the sedation protocols, hands shaking. Nyari was openly sobbing now. I can't stop it. I never could. It just is. It just pulls, and I can't make it stop. The gift was out of control now, spiraling through everyone's carefully constructed defenses, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it, except stand up and walk into it anyway. Lucas pushed away from the wall. Havel grabbed his arm. Don't. You'll only make it worse. He pulled free and walked toward the table. The pressure increased with every step. It felt like moving through water. Through memory, through every mistake he'd ever made, and every person he'd failed. He knelt beside Nyari's chair, getting to her level. "Hey," he said quietly, "I'm still here." She looked at him through tears, eyes wide with horror. "You need to leave. I can't control it. It's going to show you everything, all at once. It'll destroy you." "Probably." He took a breath, steadying himself. "But here's the thing. I've been destroyed before. Sitting in that hospital hallway, holding Jensen's effects, knowing it was my fault. I broke then, completely, and somehow I kept breathing, kept moving, kept existing. So if it needs to break me again to prove a point, then let it." "What point?" "That humans can look at the worst parts of themselves and still choose to stand up." He turned to face her fully, opening himself up in a way he'd never done, not just allowing the gift to see him, but inviting it, offering himself as a focal point instead of letting it tear through everyone indiscriminately. "If the gift needs to look at someone," he said, his voice carrying through the small room, "then look at me. Pull everything forward, every lie, every failure, every moment I've spent hating myself. Show me all of it, because I'm done hiding." Nyari's expression shifted from horror to shock. "You can't. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that everyone in this room is drowning in their own buried shame because the gift is pulling it all up at once. So let it focus on me instead. Let it do its worst. And then we'll see if I survive. And if I do, maybe that proves something." The gift, which had been swirling chaotically through the room, suddenly snapped toward him like a tether finding anchor. And Nyari saw everything. She saw Jensen dying, but she also saw the years before, the partnership, the trust, the way Lucas had been trying to prove himself, always trying to be faster, smarter, more capable. The insecurity that drove him to rush into that warehouse without backup. Not because he was brave, but because he was afraid of being seen as inadequate. She saw the trial, the sympathy in people's eyes that felt worse than accusation. The way they'd said it wasn't his fault, and how that made it impossible to process because he knew, absolutely knew, that it was. She saw the years after, the slow erosion of hope. The way he'd taken this job as a form of suicide, just slower and more socially acceptable. How he'd convinced himself that helping others fill out forms was meaningful when, really, it was just safe. No risk, no responsibility, no chance to fail anyone important again. But she also saw the moment he'd decided to approach her, the actual decision point. It hadn't been noble. It hadn't been brave. It had been watching that mother pull her child away and thinking with bitter clarity, "At least when I fail people, I don't make them watch." She saw his self-loathing, his inability to forgive himself, the way he'd turned guilt into identity because at least that was something to hold on to. And then she saw something else, something he didn't even fully realize himself. Sitting next to her those first few days hadn't felt like torture. It had felt like relief, because the gift pulled all his buried shame to the surface, but it didn't judge. It just revealed. And for someone who'd spent years judging himself, being seen completely by something that didn't condemn him was the first moment of peace he'd had in years. The gift showed him that truth, that he'd stayed not to save her, but because she'd offered him something he desperately needed. Acceptance without absolution. Being witnessed without being forgiven. It should have destroyed him, seeing the selfishness under the seemingly noble gesture. Understanding that even his attempt at redemption was, at its core, another form of running. But it didn't destroy him, because the gift didn't stop there. It showed him what came after. The conversations, the growing connection, the way helping her had slowly started to actually heal something in him. Not because it erased his guilt, but because it gave him permission to exist alongside it. And it showed him that Nyari had seen all of this from the beginning, seen the complexity and the contradiction and the messy human reality of it, and had chosen to accept his presence anyway. "If you can see all of that," Lucas said, his voice rough but steady, "and still think I'm human, still think I'm worth knowing, then maybe you're not a monster. Maybe the gift isn't a weapon. Maybe it's just a mirror that hurts because truth always does. Something fundamental shifted in that moment. The gift, which had been tearing through defenses and amplifying pain, suddenly changed. It didn't stop showing truth, but it started organizing it differently, showing not just the buried shame, but the context, the reasons, the humanity behind the failures. Sarah felt it wash over her role as a handler, the children she'd used, but also the fear that had driven those decisions, the belief that the war would never end without those methods, the genuine, misguided conviction that she was preventing greater suffering. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made it comprehensible, human, terrible and understandable at the same time, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt something other than justified numbness. She felt grief, real, raw grief for what she'd done and who she'd hurt. She collapsed into her chair and wept silently. Havel felt his bureaucratic compromises revealed, but also the impossible choices, the lives he had saved by accepting the ones he couldn't, the good he'd managed to protect by compromising on other fronts. It didn't make him heroic, but it made him human. He sank against the wall, breathing hard, but lighter somehow. Even the guards outside the door felt echoes of it, small truths, personal failures that suddenly seemed manageable when placed in full context. The neural monitors were still showing red, but a different kind of red. Not emergency, just intensity. High emotional activity, but not destructive. Cathartic. In the duct above, Timo watched through the grating and understood, for the first time, why he spent so much time hiding in the ceiling. Not because people scared him, because connection did. Because being seen meant being vulnerable, and he decided in that moment that maybe that was okay. The gift finally settled. Not gone, never gone, but focused, controlled, or rather, accepted. Nyari looked at Lucas, still kneeling beside her chair. "You gave me a choice," she whispered. "Nobody ever gave me a choice. They just avoided me, or tried to lock me away, or wanted to use me. But you let me choose whether to let you in. You made being seen a gift instead of a weapon." Lucas smiled wearily. "I still don't have all the answers. I still failed, Jensen. That's never going to not be true." "No, but maybe you can carry it differently now." "Yeah, maybe." The door opened. Medical personnel rushed in, but there was nothing to treat. Just 4 people sitting in a small room, looking exhausted and strangely peaceful. Sarah wiped her face with clinical precision. Then she looked at Nyari and said, very quietly, "I need to make some calls." Sarah's report took 2 days to write. It went through 7 drafts before she finally transmitted it to the very council. It was nothing like the document anyone expected. She requested a private conversation with Nyari first. They met in the same observation corridor where Lucas and Nyari had talked days before. The bioluminescent ocean pulsed below, indifferent to the humans and aliens working through their complicated history above it. "I used people like you," Sarah said without preamble. "Children, adults, anyone who showed the gift. We put them in rooms with prisoners and enemies and watched what happened. Some of them asked to stop. Most couldn't. The gift doesn't have an off switch. I know. I told myself it was necessary, that wars required hard choices, that the people we broke would have killed thousands more if we'd left them free." She looked at her hands. "I've spent 20 years making sure no one could ever use the gifted that way again. I thought I was atoning. I think I was just making sure no one else could do what I did. Easier to lock you all away than admit I should have refused the orders." Nyari was quiet for a moment. "In the session, what did you see?" "Everything I've been avoiding. But I also saw something I didn't expect." Sarah turned to face her. "The gift didn't break me. It should have. I've seen it break trained interrogators and combat veterans, but it didn't. It hurt. It exposed everything. But I walked out of that room intact. Because Lucas gave you context. The gift showed you the whole truth. not just the buried parts. Your human changed something, the way he offered himself, the way he accepted being seen. It shifted the pattern somehow. Sarah paused. I've been recommending isolation because I thought the gift was inherently destructive. But what if it's not? What if the destruction comes from people fleeing from it instead of facing it? I don't know if that's true for everyone. Neither do I, but I think it's worth finding out. The report Sarah submitted was unprecedented. She acknowledged the risks. She documented the incidents of psychological distress. She noted the statistical anomalies. But she concluded with a recommendation that shocked the entire review board. Recommend trial protocol, supervised mediation sessions. Subject Nyari to operate as cultural liaison with human anchor Lucas Brandt. Purpose: explore potential applications of veiled gift in conflict resolution and psychological integration services. Duration: 6-month observation period. Contingencies: full medical and security support. Havel read the report 3 times before he believed it. Then he called Nyari and Lucas into his office. The council approved a trial period, he said, still looking slightly stunned. You're being officially designated as an experimental mediator. That means supervised sessions, strict protocols, and constant monitoring. 1 incident, 1 complaint, and the trial ends. What kind of sessions? Nyari asked. That's up to you. There's no shortage of people here with buried conflicts, immigration disputes, cultural misunderstandings, personal grievances that turn into diplomatic incidents. If the gift can help resolve those, the council wants to see proof. Lucas looked at Nyari. You okay with this? She considered it. Being used again, even voluntarily. Being watched, even with good intentions, but also having a choice. Having a purpose that wasn't about isolation or shame. I want to try, she said. But I need something clear. Anyone who comes to these sessions needs to volunteer. Nobody forced, nobody coerced. They have to choose to be seen. Agreed, Havel made a note. We'll start with a call for volunteers. See who shows up. The first volunteer was unexpected. It was a Torvek named Dresh. 6-limbed, crystalline skin, voice like grinding stones. He'd been stuck in immigration limbo for 3 months due to a paperwork error that had snowballed into a diplomatic incident. His homeworld claimed he'd abandoned his responsibilities. He claimed he'd been exiled unfairly. Nobody could prove either story, so he was trapped. He showed up to the session room, where Nyari and Lucas waited, and said simply, I hear you see truth. I'm tired of lying. The session lasted 40 minutes. Lucas watched as Nyari guided Dresh through the process, feeling the gift work, but in a controlled way now. Not tearing, revealing. The truth came out gradually, painfully. Dresh had been accused of a crime he didn't commit, but he'd chosen exile over fighting the accusation because proving his innocence would have exposed his partner's illegal activities. He'd protected someone he loved at the cost of his own reputation. When it was over, Dresh sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you. I haven't told anyone that, not even myself, really. I kept calling it exile, not choice, but it was a choice, and now I can make another one. He filed formal documentation with his homeworld, the truth, all of it. His partner turned themselves in. Dresh's name was cleared. He left Lumen 4 a week later, but before he left, he found Nyari in the waiting hall and said, You gave me back something I'd lost. The ability to be honest, even when it hurt. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. The second volunteer was a human merchant with undisclosed debts. The third was a Veyri diplomat with imposter syndrome. The fourth was a couple on the edge of separation who couldn't articulate why they were failing. Not every session was a triumph. Some people weren't ready for what the gift revealed. But nobody broke. Nobody had a crisis that required medical intervention. And slowly, session by session, the waiting hall changed. Nyari still sat in row G, but now people approached her. Sometimes to schedule a session, sometimes just to talk. The 3-meter exclusion zone dissolved gradually, replaced by something that looked almost like community. Timo approached one afternoon and asked if he could try. He sat through a session where the gift showed him what he'd been hiding from. Not trauma, not grand failures, just loneliness, just the fear of being seen as young and therefore irrelevant. When it was over, he smiled and said, "Your eyes do show two truths, the one people want you to see and the one they don't." "What did you see?" Nyari asked gently. "That being young doesn't mean being wrong, and that hiding in the ceiling is just another waiting room." He started spending more time on the ground after that, started talking to people, started training as a junior mediator assistant. 6 weeks into the trial period, Sarah returned to check on progress. She reviewed session logs, interviewed participants, watched the dynamic in the waiting hall. Then she pulled Nyari and Lucas aside and said, "The council is asking if this could be replicated on other stations." "That depends," Lucas said. "Are they asking because they want to help people, or because they see a new application for something they once weaponized?" Sarah smiled slightly. It looked rusty, but genuine. "That's exactly the question I asked them. I think some of them are still figuring out the answer, but enough of them are asking in good faith that it's worth trying." "Then yes," Nyari said, "with the same conditions. Voluntary, supervised, respectful." "Agreed." As Sarah left, she paused at the door. "You know, 20 years ago I would have called you a threat, a weapon that needed to be controlled, but I'm starting to think the real threat was people like me. People who saw a powerful tool and immediately thought about how to weaponize it instead of how to understand it." "What changed your mind?" Nyari asked. "You're human." He looked at something that could destroy him and chose to face it anyway. That kind of courage is rare, and it reminded me that maybe the gift isn't about exposure. It's about whether you run from what's exposed or stand in it. After she was gone, Lucas and Nyari stood in the empty observation corridor, watching the ocean lights. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Better than I expected." "You?" "Same." He smiled. 3 months ago, I was just trying to survive each day. Now I'm an anchor for psychic mediation sessions. Is that a problem? No, it's just unexpected, like most things lately. She moved slightly closer, and this time, when their hands touched on the railing, neither pulled away. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not running. Thank you for showing me I didn't have to." 3 months into the trial program, Aurora Docks had become something unexpected. A laboratory for reconciliation, a place where buried truths didn't have to mean destroyed relationships. The statistics were remarkable. Social tension indices down by 34%, voluntary session requests up by 127%, violent incidents at 0. Immigration processing times improved because people were resolving conflicts before they escalated into bureaucratic nightmares. Havel, in a private moment, admitted to Lucas that he'd been wrong. "I spent years thinking stability meant keeping problems buried. Turns out sometimes you have to expose them to actually solve them." But not every case was simple. The hardest one came in the form of Ambassador Kelrick. He was Davroxy, a species known for rigorous logic and emotional suppression. His people believed feelings were evolutionary artifacts, useful once, but now obstacles to rational thought. He'd been on Lumen 4 for diplomatic negotiations, and they were failing spectacularly. Not because of policy disagreements, but because he couldn't understand why the other delegates kept making what he called irrational decisions. Someone suggested he try a session with Nyari. He refused initially, but desperation has a way of eroding pride. He showed up to the session room looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Lucas was there, as always, quiet support against the back wall. Nyari sat across from the ambassador, patient. "This is unscientific," Kelrick said flatly. "Emotions are chemical reactions. Acknowledging them changes nothing. Ignoring them doesn't make them stop existing," Nyari replied gently. I don't ignore them. I manage them. Control is the foundation of civilized behavior. Then this should be easy. The gift only reveals what's already there. He sat stiffly in the chair. Proceed. The gift moved carefully, respectfully. It always did now under Nyari's guidance. She'd learned to direct it rather than just survive it, to offer revelation instead of forcing it. What it found in Ambassador Kelrick was fascinating. Not absence of emotion, but a fortress of suppression so elaborate that even he'd forgotten what he'd buried. The gift carefully, methodically began to show him fear. Deep, existential fear that if he felt too much, he'd lose the logic that defined his entire sense of self. Grief for a partner he'd lost decades ago, never processed because processing would have meant admitting the loss mattered. Loneliness so profound that he'd convinced himself solitude was preference rather than consequence. And underneath it all, a desperate, hidden certainty that his people were wrong. That suppression wasn't mastery. That something vital had been lost in the pursuit of pure logic. He fought it. Hard. Decades of conditioning pushing back against the revelation. But the gift was patient. And Lucas, recognizing the struggle, spoke quietly from his corner. It's okay to feel things and still be intelligent. They're not opposites. You don't understand, Kelrick said, voice strained. My entire culture is built on the premise that emotion is weakness. If I acknowledge this, I lose everything I am. Or you become more of who you actually are, Nyari said. The gift doesn't take away your logic. It just shows you that you're more than only that. The moment broke. Kelrick buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in 40 years, he cried. Not dramatic, not performative, just quiet, exhausted tears. When it was over, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, I need to think about this. He left. Lucas and Nyari waited, uncertain if the session had been success or disaster. 3 days later, Kelrick returned. His negotiation style had changed, not less logical, but more complete. He started acknowledging emotional factors in policy discussions, started asking how decisions would make people feel, not just how they'd affect systems. The negotiations succeeded. Both sides found compromise not because logic demanded it, but because they understood each other's actual concerns. Before leaving Lumen 4, Kelrick found Nyari in the waiting hall. I spent 40 years believing that feeling was weakness, he said. You showed me it's just information, useful information. I'm not sure I can ever thank you adequately for that. You just did, she replied. Word of the Kelrick case spread through diplomatic channels. Within weeks, 3 other stations requested information about establishing similar programs. The Very Council, which had sent Sarah to prove Nyari was dangerous, now found itself fielding requests to train more mediators. Sarah returned to Aurora Docks to deliver the news in person. She found Nyari and Lucas in their usual spots in the observation corridor, watching the evening lights on the ocean. The Council wants to make this permanent, Sarah said. Aurora Docks as a pilot site. 3 other stations starting trial programs, and they're asking if you'd be willing to help train others with the gift. Others? Nyari looked startled. There are more? 17 that we know of, all in isolation, all classified as potential threats. Sarah's expression was complicated. You've proven something I spent 20 years trying to deny. The gift isn't the danger. Our fear of it is. And maybe it's time we stopped punishing people for having the courage to be honest. What about you? Lucas asked. What happens to you after spending 2 decades on the wrong side of this? I'll be advocating for policy change. It's not redemption, it's just what comes next. She looked at Nyari. You don't have to forgive me, I'm not asking for that. But I am asking if you'd be willing to help make sure no one else has to grow up hiding what they are. Nyari considered it, then nodded. Yes, on the same conditions. Voluntary, respectful. Focusing on healing, not utility. Agreed. After Sarah left, Lucas and Nyari remained by the window. The question that had been hovering between them for months finally surfaced. So what are we? Lucas asked. Partners? Friends? Something else? Niari smiled, and it reached her dual-colored eyes. I think we're two people who learned to be seen completely and decided it was better than hiding. That's not a category. Good. I'm tired of categories. He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him really laugh. Unguarded and genuine. She realized she wanted to hear that sound more often. They stood close, hands linked on the railing, watching the bioluminescent ocean paint light across the plateau's edge. Above them, through the transparent sections of the station, stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, more sessions. More people choosing to be seen. More proof that vulnerability could be strength if you had someone brave enough to stand with you while you faced it. But tonight, they were just two people who'd found each other in a waiting room and decided that maybe waiting was finally over. The shift ended late. Lucas had spent the day helping a family from Cravath Prime navigate visa extensions, explaining in 3 languages why their documentation needed to be filed in a specific order. His back hurt, his coffee had gone cold hours ago, and he was pretty sure he had developed a stress-induced eye twitch. He loved it. The waiting hall was mostly empty now, just a few late arrivals dozing in chairs or staring at data pads. The ocean outside had shifted to its deep night colors, blue so dark they were almost purple, punctuated by brilliant flashes from whatever lived in the depths. Niari sat in what used to be the empty corner, reviewing notes from the day's sessions on her tablet. She had changed since those first weeks. Not dramatically, nothing you could point to precisely, but the tightness in her shoulders had eased. The way she held herself was less like bracing for impact, more like someone who had learned they could lower their guard. She looked up as he approached, and smiled. The real one, that reached her dual-colored eyes and made something in his chest feel warm and settled. "Long day?" she asked. "Endless." "You?" "3 sessions. 2 went well. 1, the person was not ready. They will come back when they are." Lucas dropped into the chair beside her, the same one he had chosen that first day. "I was thinking about something. Dangerous habit." "Funny." He turned to face her. "That first day when I sat down here, I told you I was not afraid. Want to know the truth?" Niari set down her tablet, giving him her full attention. "Always. I was terrified, not of you, specifically, of everything, of making another mistake, of getting close to someone and failing them, of all the things in my head that I had been running from for 3 years. He paused. "But I was more scared of spending the rest of my life running, so I sat down and hoped I could hold it together long enough to not make an idiot of myself." "You did make an idiot of yourself," she said, but her voice was gentle. "Sitting next to someone everyone avoids, announcing you are not afraid when you clearly were. It was reckless and illogical and very, very human. Still worked, though. It did, because you stayed. Even when the Don Velado showed you everything you had been hiding from yourself, you stayed. No one had ever done that before." Plus, she reached across the space between them, took his hand. "I still do not understand why you were not afraid." Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "Easy. I had already seen my worst parts. The guilt, the failure, all of it. It was already there, eating at me every day. When the Don Velado pulled it to the surface, it was not new. It was just honest." He squeezed her hand. "If you could look at all that, every terrible thing I have done and failed to do, and still choose to sit here with me, still choose to build something with me, then I am not the brave one. I am the lucky one." Niari's eyes went bright, and for a moment she could not speak. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You changed everything. We changed everything. You are the one who learned to control the gift, to offer it instead of having it forced out of you. Because you showed me I could, that the Don Velado was not a curse. It was just a mirror that needed someone brave enough to stand in front of it without flinching." They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the bioluminescent patterns outside. Around them, the station hummed with life. Someone laughed at the far end of the hall. A cleaning drone whirred past, apologizing in 6 languages for the minor disruption. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but no longer frightening. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Not because they had to, but because they had chosen to. And that made all the difference. 6 months passed, like water finding its level. The Aurora Docks Mediation Initiative expanded to 7 stations. Training programs were established. The Veri Council officially reclassified the Don Villado from threat to therapeutic tool, though Syrah messaged regularly that it remained a battle worth fighting every day. Lucas stood at the familiar windows one morning, watching a transport arrive. The hall behind him buzzed with activity. What had once been an empty corner, avoided by everyone, had become the heart of something unprecedented. Timo, 17 now and officially assigned as a mediation assistant, bounded over with his usual excess of energy. New arrival manifests just posted. We have got 2 referrals from the Valorian delegation. Guess Keveth has been talking. Good. We have slots open Thursday. Also, there is a guy here asking about sessions. Says he heard about it from someone back home. Looks nervous. Timo grinned. Want me to do the welcome speech? Go for it. You have better bedside manner than I do anyway. Timo headed off, already launching into his explanation about how mediation worked and why it was okay to be scared. Lucas watched him go, remembering that kid hiding in the ceiling ducts because the world felt too loud. Now here he was, helping others find their way through fear. Nyari appeared beside him, 2 cups of actual decent coffee in hand. One of the perks of official program status was better supplies. Busy day tomorrow, she said, handing him a cup. Yeah? You good for 3 sessions? 4, if the walk-in needs immediate help. I can handle it now. She could. The Don Villado no longer controlled her. She controlled it, offering it gently, anchoring people through their difficult truths instead of drowning them in reflection. The gift that had once isolated her had become the foundation of connection. Through the windows, a new immigrant arrived, looking lost and overwhelmed. A few months ago, they would have noticed the empty corner and instinctively avoided it. Today, someone walked up to them, smiled, and directed them to where they needed to go. The station's latest data, scrolling across nearby screens, told a story that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Psychological stress incidents down by 41%. Voluntary mediation sessions up by over 100%. Diplomatic conflicts resolved through understanding rather than formal arbitration up by 33%. 0 casualties from psychic exposure. They are calling it the Aurora Protocol now, Nyari said, watching the data. Stations across 3 sectors implementing variations. Catchy name? Better than the Nyari method. I vetoed that immediately. Lucas laughed, then sobered. You know what the craziest part is? None of this required new technology or complex policy. It just required someone deciding that truth, uncomfortable as it is, was worth facing. That vulnerability was not weakness. It required a human sitting next to someone everyone feared and saying he was not afraid. I was afraid. I know. That is what made it brave. A new family approached, 3 generations of Grecians, the youngest child clutching a stuffed creature and staring around with wide eyes. They looked tired, but hopeful, the way people do when they are starting over. Nyari straightened, setting down her coffee, professional mode engaging, but warmer now, informed by months of practice and purpose. Welcome to Aurora Docks, she said, and her voice had that quality that made people relax despite themselves. You look like you could use some help. This way. As she guided them toward processing, the child looked back at her with curious eyes. Not afraid, just interested in the woman with 2 colors in each eye who smiled like she understood what it felt like to be far from home. Lucas watched them go, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest, the one that said he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Later, As the evening shift wound down, they stood together at the windows. The bioluminescent tide was changing, deep purples giving way to softer blues. In the reflection on the glass, Lucas could see both their faces, side by side. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not sat down that day?" he asked. "Every day," Nyari said quietly. "I would still be in that corner, alone, convinced I was dangerous. Eventually, they would have found a reason to transfer me. I would have spent the rest of my life in containment, my gift wasted, my life half-lived. And I would still be running from a guilt I could not outpace, helping people at arm's length, never letting anyone close enough to see what I was carrying. We saved each other. Yeah, we did." Nyari turned to face him fully. "I have been thinking about something Sarah said before she left, about how humans have this strange resistance to looking at their own guilt and continuing to stand. She called it illogical. I think she was wrong. Oh, it is not illogical. It is the most logical thing in the universe, because the alternative is to stop, to give up, to let one mistake define everything that comes after, and humans refuse to do that. You refuse. Even when it costs you everything, you keep trying." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "We are stubborn that way. You are transformative that way." She took both his hands in hers. "My entire species was taught that emotion is weakness, that vulnerability is liability, that power must be controlled, contained, buried. And then you sat down beside me and said you were not afraid, and everything I had been taught unraveled, because you showed me that the opposite of fear is not control, it is connection." "Nyari, I am not finished." She smiled through sudden tears. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, not because you are fearless, but because you are terrified and you choose kindness anyway. You are the reason I am here, the reason any of this exists, the reason I learned that my gift could heal instead of harm." Lucas pulled her close, and they stood there in the empty that was no longer empty corner. Two people who had found each other in the spaces everyone else avoided. "I am still the lucky one," he whispered into her hair. She laughed, watery but genuine. "We can both be lucky." Deal. Around them, Aurora Docks continued its eternal rhythm. Ships arriving and departing, people finding their way through bureaucracy and hope. And in the south window section, where light from a bioluminescent ocean painted everything in colors that did not exist anywhere else, two people stood together and proved something the galaxy had forgotten, that the scariest thing was not seeing the truth, it was running from it. And humans, beautiful, chaotic, emotionally reckless humans, had never been very good at running when someone needed them to stay. The station systems recorded it all, data points that told a story bigger than numbers. The transformation of fear into understanding, the conversion of isolation into community, the proof that empathy was not weakness but revolutionary strength. Somewhere on stations spreading across known space, others were learning what Aurora Docks had discovered, that vulnerability could be power, that facing pain could lead to healing, that one person choosing courage could change everything. It started with 5 words whispered in a waiting hall. "I am not afraid," and it changed the galaxy, not through force or technology or superior firepower, through one human sitting beside someone everyone else avoided and choosing to stay. That was the moment everything shifted. When Lucas Brandt decided his guilt was not as heavy as Nyari's loneliness, when he chose connection over safety, when he proved that humanity's greatest weakness, their inability to suppress emotion, was actually their most profound gift. Because in a universe that prized logic and control, humans alone understood something essential. That being seen, truly seen, in all your broken and guilty and imperfect glory, and being accepted anyway, was not just healing. It was transcendent, and that was worth being afraid for. In the end, Lucas and Nyari didn't change the galaxy through power. They changed it by refusing to look away from the parts of themselves they feared most. That's the quiet paradox of being human. Sometimes the bravest act isn't fighting a war. but standing still long enough for someone else to finally see you. And now you, watching from your own corner of the universe. What truths do you keep buried because you're afraid they'll define you? What connection have you avoided because it felt safer to disappear than to be known? And if someone sat beside you, the way Lucas did, what would you finally allow yourself to face? If you stayed with us until now, drop the word "unveiled" in the comments so we know you walked through this truth with us. Tell us your city, your own coordinates in this vast star map of humans trying their best. And if this story hits somewhere between your ribs and your sanity, subscribe, like, hype it, share it with someone who hides more than they admit, and catch the next video on the card that's about to appear on your screen. Because trust me, out here in the HFY cosmos, we face the void together.